Hey, this is Carl, also known as Zarepath in the custom magic community. Today I'm doing a quick deck tech for the deck that just won the custom standard tournament, the second tournament for the Urshad rotation. And that was my deck, Bant Flash. I was very happy to win with it. I was honestly a bit surprised. I really liked the deck. I thought it was good, but I thought some of its matchups were worse than they actually ended up being. Um, so I just wanted to go over that deck and also talk about what changes I would like to make and show that list. And then also, finally, Netropolis rotated in. So at the end of the video, I would show what changes I would make with the Netropolis rotation so that if you want to play this deck moving forward, what I would suggest changing. And it's not very much. I don't think Netropolis brings very much at all to the deck, but that's okay. Not every set needs to add to every deck. So I don't think this is like the red deck wins deck I that I won a previous tournament with, where once it won, it was kind of clear that this is like a very strong deck that is probably a big part of the format now. I think this is just kind of a variant of a control deck, and um, the changes I'd make to the deck mostly push it more into being a more hard control deck as opposed to what it is now, which is kind of a fluid mix of beat down versus control, depending on what you draw and depending on the matchup. So this is Bant Flash, and uh, it's built around some synergies of just casting. Every spell can be cast on your opponent's turn, and in Hollows there was kind of a Flash Matters archetype, which worked with some cards from earlier sets that aren't in Custard now. But I noticed that, sets that have been coming out been adding these really good flash creatures. And I thought, well, let me try doing this flash deck. And so I tried to build something similar to the Simic flash deck in normal standard right now. And it's very different in a few important ways, but um, but it can play similarly in that you do everything at instant speed. So here, Darkroot Hunt Pack, you get a free wolf every time you cast a card with flash. We don't actually have that many cards with flash in particular. We have 18, right? But they're all good, and you want to be playing all of them. And so being able to just get value with wolves is fantastic, especially if you have a couple of these. And then playing one Containment Priest gives you 6/2/2s. Um, the and then you have Darkroot Tracker, which it it's really great because it gives you value not just with your flash creatures. You can get a hunt pack back if it's been killed, but you can also get your instants back. So if you've been doing counter spells, if you've been doing draw spells, being able to get them back is really great. Um, Containment Priest is so the base of the deck is blue green. The green is for these cards, Hunt Pack and Tracker, and Bounty of the Gardens. I'll get into that later, but that's Bounty of the Gardens is one of the main reasons to be playing this. It's just such a fantastic card. It's such an absurd rate. It's probably the most powerful card in the deck by itself. Reasons to be blue are Tagal, who I always incorrectly pronounce as Tiggle, uh, because he lets you recast your counter spells that you're casting on turn 2 and start to get 2-for-1 value. And there's a lot of great. Bounty of the Gardens costs just 2 mana and is instant speed. And being able on like turn 6 to cast a 6/6 with this, and then another 6/6, then you're representing 14 damage on your next turn if they've tapped out. So that's really good. Um, I used to just have 2 or 3 because he's a legend. It feels weird to have 4 of him. But the deck is built around him so much, and he's often removed or you trade with him. And sometimes you just legend rule it if you need to cast something and you don't feel terrible about it, just because the card selection from the graveyard of spells you've already cast is really good. He's probably the backbone of the deck. When you win a tournament in Custom Standard, you get to pick a promo, one of the cards in your deck, to become a promo that becomes like a full art promo that is in the Cockatrice package for the next update for the format. I picked Tagal, and I found a really sweet art for him that I hope people like. I'm looking forward to that being released. I only have 3 Darkroot Tracker because it does cost 4 mana. It's a bit more of a grindy card. And going into the tournament, I was really worried about mono red and base red aggro decks just being too fast for this deck to keep up with, which I think is still an issue for sure. But I didn't end up ever having to face one, so I got very lucky in that way. And that's another reason why I wouldn't say that this deck, by virtue of winning the tournament, is a sign that it's, even a tier 1 deck. I think it's probably tier 2, maybe tier 1.5. With the tier 1 decks probably being like mono red aggro, crest, and maybe black white tradition mid range. And now that rotations happen, Netropolis is rotating in, all of that may be changed. But this deck is still solid and still has game against all of those decks. I think it's very good against black white tradition, and I think it's very good against crest, but I think red deck wins just kind of tramples it. Containment Priest incidentally helps you against crest if they're using crest to cheat creatures in, using its Paradise ability to cheat creatures in. One thing to note is that if you respond to the trigger with Containment Priest, they just choose not to put a creature card into play, so you don't get to get them, but you can just prevent them from using the ability. However, their creatures will still have haste, so it's not a really amazing thing to have against crest. It just will sometimes help a lot. They'll be forced to cast their stuff instead of cheating it, but it'll still have haste. And sometimes when you play against crest, they'll just side these out. It's also really good against Isemerge because of the card Reemergence, which you cheat stuff in from the graveyard, and that can be difficult to play around for the Reemergence player. They spend so many turns setting up this combo, and they try and Reemergence their Izalith, and flashing in Containment Priest is really good. Emissary of Dark Tides, I felt like had just such great flexibility. It was a great tempo card. You can bounce their big epic spells that they're casting. An instant spell with X in its cost. I used it to bounce Crest on turn 3 a few times when I knew they couldn't recast it the same turn, just to delay them turning on Paradise. It can also be good against planeswalkers like Sarasa. That's also used in Crest. Sorry I keep mentioning cards from the Crest deck, but that's what I played by far the most games against in the tournament, because I first lost to Sol Invictus playing Crest, and then I had to face him again in the finals because I came through the losers bracket. With some luck, a lot of the people I played against conceded just because they couldn't play in the tournament anymore for scheduling reasons. And then I had to win 2 best-of-5s against Crest, so I played a lot of games, and I've become very familiar with that matchup in particular. But I did notice Emissary wasn't always that great. A lot of creatures get their value from entering the battlefield, and so returning tapped creatures to their owner's hand is not that great. This is mostly good against aggro matchups, which I did say is a weakness of the deck, so I feel weird about pulling them out completely. You being able to bounce a hatchling that has hit its prestige trigger. It's a 4/4 fire breathing flying creature. Being able to bounce that back to their hand is really great. And you can interact a little bit with other combo decks, at least delay them while putting a body on the board. And making a wolf if you've got that going on. So that's the creature suite. The creatures are the least impactful part of the deck in some respects. Like all of the spells, like at least 1 for 1, some of them 2 for 1. Bounty is enormous. It's great for winning the game out of nowhere if you're patient and wait for the lands to get big enough. And Tagal can get a lot of value from them. But cards like Emissary and Containment Priest in a lot of matchups just don't do anything. They're just flash creatures that help you trigger Hunt Pack. But Darkroot Tracker I was always very happy to cast. Even if you're not getting something you can cast that same turn, just casting this at the end of their turn and getting back like a Wander the Unknown or a Dissipate just to maintain control, so that the next turn you've got that counterspell up is really good. So the instance that we got, Bounty of the Gardens, this wants you to play a lot of differently named lands, and if you're 3 colors or more, that's very easy. I told you earlier I was base blue-green. The only white cards I have are Containment Priest and Wander the Unknown. Wander is really important. Containment Priest is less so. But another reason to splash that 3rd color is specifically for this card. And you can see my mana base has so many different lands that helps this get turned on pretty easily. Dissipate, just a great counter spell, particularly if they're playing things like Darkbreaker Angel, which I think our deck is fairly good against anyway, but because we have Wander the Unknown for exiling it. But just having a 3 mana hard counter is great to have. Epic of Ekabram is fantastic. It has strict color requirements, but we have a lot of blue in our mana base. And most of the time, you want to counter something and draw a card as early as turn 5. And don't feel like you're losing value by not waiting until you can get the X value incredibly large, because you have your trackers that can bring them back later in the game and then, do an absurd draw. They can also clear the board. We don't have a lot of evasion or any evasion at all with our creatures. And we've got these big boys that we want to end the game with. More than once I used Epic of Ekabram just to clear their board so I could attack in for the win. Yeah, so Epic of Ekabram's great. It used to be a 4 of, but I was worried about matchups like aggro where you need more interaction earlier on. And so we've got this suite of 2 mana counter spells, which is 2 Essence Scatter. I think most of the best decks are running creature spells that you have to counter, but not all of them. And then like Black-White Tradition actually doesn't have that many creatures in it, and so the spell doesn't get so great, which is why there's just 2 of them here. Mystic Rebuttal is a fantastic flexible counterspell. Against decks like Crest in particular and other control decks, it loses value pretty quick, and at least you have the focus, but you side that out for those matchups. For Wander, I would only side some of this out against control. It's just a great spell to have. Mana base, I just basically have 1 of everything that's in any of the colors, and then 3 mana Confluence to make sure that I have the mana I need. Tropical Channel, I think, since we're base blue-green, this is a really great... this is the only blue-green land that can reliably enter untapped at some point, and you can be patient enough using your other lands until this can enter untapped. Flourishing Waterways is the next best one at entering untapped, but we don't have that many forests and islands in the deck to ensure that this can always enter untapped, and there's some awkwardness with sequencing with this card sometimes. The sideboard, Divert Aggression is a card I used to have in the main deck. I really want it to be good. It's an unsummon that also gains you life, but it does cost 2 mana, and the great thing about unsummon in these kinds of decks usually is you're able to put enough pressure on that them having to spend mana to replay their card is not great for them, because you're putting so much pressure. You're just going to win too fast that the lack of value doesn't matter as much. Also, unsummon only costs 1 mana, and you can often do another thing the same turn. So like counter a spell and unsummon a creature, or play a creature and unsummon their creature, and you have this great tempo ability. Unfortunately, the flash creatures we have are not that great at putting pressure on. Darkroot Hunt Pack by itself does almost nothing. And even if you do cast 1 more flash spell, 3 mana for 2 2/2s is not winning a lot of games. And when there's these absurdly big creatures in all of these other decks, 3/3s are really popular because of the card Tempered Ankelin, which can go in almost any deck and help stabilize very easily or put a beatdown on if needed. It means that 2/2s are not that great in the format. So the aggressive tempo beatdown strategy of the deck is not as good as I had hoped it was, which makes tempo cards like Emissary not as good. It makes Huntback not as good. Containment Priest just isn't a very strong tempo aggressive card. So a strategy using Divert Aggression aggressively is really bad. I still have it in the sideboard though, because it's very good against the mono red decks. Even when you're losing value, you don't care so much about value because over the game, you're definitely going to outvalue red deck wins. The key is surviving, and this helps you do that really well. Just like with Emissary, Divert Aggression can help you bounce. They're hasty creatures, they're prestiged creatures, things that they use Pyromancer's Wisdom to ritual into, so they cast this spell and they have more mana than they should on that turn, so they cast a big hasty creature like Screecher. Being able to then bounce it back to their hand is really backbreaking. And gaining life. So I throw these in, and then they're great to recur with Tagal or with Tracker. So then that kind of mitigates the value loss. Epic of Hanaru I was very pleased with every time I cited it in. I cited it in more against the grindy decks. I didn't consider Crest a grindy matchup. You do need to grind them out, but you have to 1-for-1 them until you can. So this would mostly just help close. It'd be a win more card in that matchup. But in grindy matchups like White-Black Tradition or other mid-range matchups, this is fantastic because it can, if they decide they want to race you, this can gain you life out of nowhere. It's a great top deck if you're in top deck mode because you're often you can make 7 or 8 creature tokens and just kind of swarm them. It also has a really fun mode for this deck where you can exile a creature and return it to the battlefield. So you can blink your Tagal to get back a counter spell or removal spell, which is a really cool utility. But be aware that if you have Containment Priest in play, that will not go how you want it to. You'll blink your Tagal, and your Tagal will get exiled, so be very careful with that. Although I found in matchups where I wanted to bring in Epic of Hanaru, I was citing out Containment Priest, so that worked out. You want Essence Scatters for aggro and for Crest. The 4 negates. I throw in a couple against Black-White Tradition. And other mid-range decks that have lots of Planeswalkers and enchantments. But 4 of them come in against Control. And I also bring in 2 Raise the Alarm against Control, just to put in some extra damage. Final verdict. I'm not sure if this is correct. I didn't actually playtest it, but that's also against aggro decks. Not just red deck wins, but also like aristocrats and things where they fill the board really wide. And all of your 1-for-1ing and even 2-for-1ing is not going to be good enough. They're just going to have too much of a board presence, and you have to reset. This is the only thing in the 75 that is sorcery speed, but I think it's necessary. I think you have to have it. So that's the deck that I used. The lands I kind of went over. They're mostly blue-green with some white. Royal Domain is really good. Most of our spells cost 3 mana or more, and so this ensures that you can hit Emissary or Track or Hunt Pack on turn 3. And that's the deck that won the tournament. That I was pleased with how it did. I think if some of the people who dropped out didn't drop out and I had to play them instead, I think the decks, still could have beat those decks, but it might not have done as well. Just, for disclaimer. Matt had a very similar flash deck that had red instead of white, and it was pretty interesting. It used Demi, Origin Seeker, to be a counterspell, a pseudo counterspell that either gives you board or counterspell at flash speed. I thought of red for a while. I didn't see what other value there was in having red in the deck. Maybe you could have stuff like Arcane Discharge as removal. But Wander the Unknown I thought was too important. Being able to interact and just kill absolutely anything with 2 mana was really good. Like, for example, against Crest, having red instead of white would not fare very well, I think. But otherwise, like, his deck might have beat my deck. Because it might have had a better matchup against decks like mine. Since that difference in creature removal doesn't matter as much. His shocks and whatever would have been just fine against all of my creatures that have exactly 2 toughness. Now, what I think is better than this, though, is... So these are updates I would make. You notice now there's only this. Now I just call it Bant Flash Control because it's completely control focused. I'm not trying the tempo plan as much because I'm not convinced that the wolf payoff with the hunt pack is consistent enough to be a real game plan for the deck. So now it's just Tracker and Tagal, who were the best flash creatures anyway in the deck and the best at getting value out. But you'll notice a lot of the instants are the same. I still have the 4 Bounty. I'm up to 4 Dissipate instead of 3 because we're more controlling. Same with Epic of Ekabram. And I decided to main deck the Epics of Hanaru because, like I said, I was always happy when I brought it in. Now there's not as much of a problem if I decide I want to flicker it to Gaul and Containment Priest, making that a horrible play. And, just being able to go really wide in your main deck is good. Still have the 2 Essence Scatter, went up to 3 Rebuttal, and I actually mained a couple of Negates just because I think being able to have a wider array of counter spells is good in a control deck. And the 4 Wander the Unknown. So main difference is, what do we gain by losing those creatures? What do we have instead? Well, we're not as concerned about having a critical mass of flash creatures to trigger Hunt Pack. So we've added those few counter spells, right? I also added Harrow, which is fascinating, being an instant speed ramp spell, of which there are not very many, and one that doesn't lose you much tempo. It also, well, it does a few things, right? It's instant speed, which is important for this deck. 2 is it ramps, which is important because being able to hit 4 mana is really important, and being able to hit 6 mana is really important. Once you get to 6 mana, you can tracker back a Wander the Unknown or an Essence Scatter or a Mystic Rebuttal and have a great toolbox turn where you can 2-for-1 them pretty well. Also, getting lots of mana for big epics is really good. Turn 5 is really good because you can almost always 2-for-1 whatever they try and cast on turn 5 with your Epic of Ekabram. Okay, so, it's instant speed. It ramps us. Number 3 is it fixes our mana, but it doesn't just fix our mana, it also kind of fixes our land count. So Bounty, we really want all of the differently named lands. But we have a fair amount of basics, which is kind of necessary for running Harrow, but also necessary if other people are running Wander the Unknown. What you can do is you can sacrifice one of your basics and find the 2 other basics. Or, if you still need that land, you can sacrifice it, get an island in a plains, or an island in a forest, or whatever it is you're sacrificing. So you can increase your bounty count by design with Harrow, which is really nice. You can if you have 2 of the same named land, you can sacrifice it and get 2 completely new ones. And then the fourth thing, first thing is its instant speed, second thing is its ramp, third thing is its fixing, and it helps with bounty. And then the fourth thing is that those lands enter untapped, and we have so many great 2-mana instant speed interactions in the deck by design because of building around Tagal. Being able to ramp and do that at the same turn is really good. Almost as good as being able to make a creature block something or trade and cast another 2-mana spell. So Harrow, I might even go up to 4 depending on how testing goes with this deck, but being able to cast Harrow and cast a spell is just really good. I'm really optimistic about it. The lands are a little bit different. I don't have the 4 of Tropical Channel anymore because I don't have to hit the double green for Hunt Pack. So I was able to go a little bit less intense on the green and kind of spread out my lands a little more. I went down to 2 Flourishing Waterways, which I mentioned wasn't as great as I'd hoped it would be. And then just down to 1 Royal Domain, mostly so I could add some more basic lands. So we have a little bit more of untapped lands helping us cast things on curve, but also helping us use Harrow better. Sideboard is essentially the same as before. Still have Raise the Alarm for applying pressure and control, go up to 4 negates. I added Naturalize um, because in matchups where they have lots of artifacts or enchantments, which with Civilize is happening more often, or if they have Into the Lion's Den to kind of disrupt our hand, or if they have a Tradition, which is really tough to beat if you control, you can remove it with Naturalize and even get it back later if you need to. If they're a heavy artifact enchantment deck, this becomes really good. If there's just a few targets, just having one or two of these in the deck can be helpful. But everything else is basically the same as in the other deck. And then just to finish off the video, Netropolis is rotated in. Let me make sure I've got, okay, yeah, the latest Netropolis files in here. What can we add in Netropolis? Well, there's actually not a lot that helps us specifically here. So we're going to say type is instant. Let's just go through all the white instants. We don't have creatures with CMC 2 or less. These are mostly limited things. That's maybe, but it's 3 mana instead of 2. We don't really want to just be gaining life. We can gain life and draw a card, maybe, but superiority is not easy to get with this deck. Viral Fame, actually, that has a similar problem as Divert Aggression, because it's more of a tempo play, and it gains them life, so maybe it's good against aggro. Moderator's Discretion is one I thought about, but again, it's more of a tempo counterspell. I think Mystic Rebuttal is better. That's okay, but it's 3 mana. We've got different kinds of counterspells, but they care about synergies that we don't really have in the deck. This is a soft murder. Again, Wander the Unknown is just going to be better. In green, there's not a lot of instants to work with. We can fight stuff or untap our creatures, but that's inconsistent for us. Yeah. So we don't gain much as far as that. What we can really add, though, is lands in Netropolis. So we have these fetch lands, and since we have such a wide variety of lands, many of which are typed, actually adding just one fetch land of the colors that have it can be really good. So we have the blue-white and green-white, since the fetch lands are only ally colors. And then Coruscating Cityscape is like Mana Confluence, except it doesn't cost you life. It costs you a card from your hand. And you can pay 2 to get that card back whenever you want. And so sometimes if you're sitting on like an epic that you're waiting to cast till later, or you have a situational or a bounty you don't plan on casting till much later, you don't really mind setting that card aside until later. The problem with having this card in our deck is normally we just always say we play a land and say pass. Here, if you want to get that card back, you actually have to do it on your turn. I like adding just one of those though to be a split with Mana Confluence. The main thing, I feel like the mana basis was already great. The main thing that this does is it helps us helps our bounties be more consistently huge. Flourishing Waterways was a land that I was not as happy with as I thought I would be. I do like Glacial Fortress and Tropical Channel. I wonder if we can afford to lose a basic. We have to get back down to 24 lands. So I'm just wondering, what do we go down to 3 islands? Or I like having 2 forests and 2 plains. That helps ensure we can. I don't want to go below 2 on the basics. Or do we lose Glacial Fortress? White is kind of important for hitting Wander. Blue is very important for all of our counter spells. Forests are not as important. Like we only have them for Harrow and Bounty. And Darkroot Tracker, I guess. But those are all much later. So maybe it's tropical channel, I don't know. But this can enter untapped. Of course, so can an island. Maybe the correct thing is go down to one tropical channel there. Anyway, so this is what I would do with the Netropolis rotation. This is how I'd rebuild the deck. More control focus. All I would change with the Lance with Netropolis. That's the only thing I think Netropolis brings. But I'm excited to try this out in the new rotation and excited to play with Netropolis cards. I'll be making another video later this week, hopefully, that talks about some cool cards coming in from Netropolis that I'm excited to build around. This was the deck tech for Bant Flash and update to Bant Flash Control. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you later.